Ever have that moment where you're staring at your reflection trying to psych yourself up for a night you've been planning for literal years? That was me smoothing wrinkles from my engagement dress for the 20th time while watching Mercedes and BMWs pull up to my property. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Behind me, Michael appeared, looking annoyingly perfect in his tailored suit. "They're here," he said, eyes full of that mix of worry and protectiveness I'd come to rely on. I took a deep breath. Showtime. Walking into my own foyer felt surreal. I'd bought this Victorian estate, my childhood neighbor's home, 6 months ago, but tonight wasn't about real estate. It was about the moment my parents would finally see who I'd become while they were busy dismissing me. Mom spotted us first, performing her signature air kiss routine. "Emma darling. What an interesting venue choice." Dad checked his watch, always too busy for me, while scanning the restored crown molding with that critical eye I'd grown up under. "Your sister would have chosen something more tasteful." And there it was. Not even 5 minutes in. I swallowed the familiar sting. "Thanks for coming." The evening blurred into a champagne-soaked haze of introductions and small talk. I'd invited a careful mix of Michael's law partners and my business associates, people who knew my worth. Claire arrived fashionably late, turning heads in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Unlike our parents, my sister never made me feel second-rate. She hugged me like she meant it. "This place is incredible. When you said you bought a house, I never imagined that I could afford something this nice." I finished, the edge in my voice sharper than intended. Her cheeks flushed. "I just meant it's beautiful. I'm honestly blown away." Before I could respond, Michael clinked his glass for speeches. When I met Emma, Michael's voice carried warmth through the crowded room. She was the most brilliant person in our MBA program, but wouldn't let anyone see how extraordinary she was. I watched my parents practice social smiles, wondering if they were even listening. "Everything we've built together exists because of her vision and tenacity," Michael continued. "She sees potential where others see only ruin." Dad shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks with Mom. That familiar expression, the one they'd worn when I'd announced I was leaving pre-law to pursue urban development. Disappointment wrapped in disapproval. "Now," Michael concluded, "I believe Emma's father would like to say a few words." My stomach dropped. We hadn't planned this part. Dad approached with that country club confidence I'd failed to inherit, silver hair catching the chandelier light. "When Emma told us she was engaged," he began, "her mother and I were surprised. Emma has always been." He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound too judgmental in mixed company, independent. I felt Michael tense beside me. "As many of you know, our family has traditions. The Miller estate has passed down through generations, always to the child who would best preserve our legacy." The room fell silent. This wasn't a congratulatory speech. It was something else entirely. Tonight, with Emma beginning her own family, seems the appropriate time to announce that the family home and business will be passing to Claire upon our retirement. I stopped breathing. "Claire has demonstrated the reliability and commitment that this responsibility requires," Dad continued, his words slicing through me. "Emma has always pursued her own interests, regardless of family expectations." The implication hung heavy. I'd never been reliable enough. Never good enough. He twisted the knife. "Emma's always been bright, but frankly, she's never shown the stability or financial responsibility needed for such an inheritance." 28 years of disapproval condensed into one brutal moment. Claire stared at her champagne flute, clearly blindsided. Michael's jaw tightened, and I caught his eyes, saw the controlled fury in them. He gave me an imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Dad, for that illuminating speech," I said, stepping forward with surprisingly steady legs. "Perhaps you'd all like to join me on the terrace? There's something I'd like to show you." The autumn air hit my flushed skin as guests filtered onto the stone terrace. Fairy lights twinkled in the gardens below, the scene picture perfect despite the chaos inside me. "This view has always been my favorite," I said, voice steadier than my heartbeat. I gestured to the right, where floodlights illuminated the property adjacent to my parents' estate, A stunning modernist mansion with clean lines and walls of glass capturing the sunset in fiery orange reflections. I've always admired your sense of legacy, Dad. It inspired me to create my own. Confusion clouded his features as he looked between me and the neighboring property. That property was abandoned for years, Mom said. The Henderson bankruptcy scandal was quite something. Yes, it was, I agreed. Until Luminous Developments acquired it 3 years ago. We've been renovating it ever since. Luminous? Dad's voice faltered. That's your company? Our company, I corrected, taking Michael's hand. We founded it together right after business school. You know, when you told me my thesis on repurposing abandoned commercial spaces was impractical dreaming? The shocked silence was everything I'd imagined during those sleepless nights planning this moment. You own that? Claire asked, pointing to the glass mansion, genuine admiration in her voice. Emma, that's incredible. The renovations finished last month, I explained. We moved in last week. This house, I gestured to the Victorian estate around us, is my first investment property. I bought it specifically for tonight. Dad's face cycled through confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. You couldn't possibly afford. Actually, she could, Michael interjected smoothly. Emma's company has developed 6 commercial properties in the last 4 years. This is her first residential restoration project. Mom's champagne glass trembled. But you never said anything. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. You've spent my entire life convinced I was destined to fail. I don't understand, Dad said, sounding genuinely confused. If you've been so successful, why keep it secret from us? For the first time, I saw not the intimidating father of my childhood but an aging man confronting his own misjudgment. I tried telling you, I said, memories resurfacing of dismissed achievements. When I graduated business school, when I secured my first investment partner, when we broke ground on our first project. Each time, you changed the subject to Claire's accomplishments. That's not true, Mom protested weakly. It is, Claire said, surprising me by stepping to my side. They've always compared us, Mom. Always made Emma feel she wasn't enough. The party guests had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, witnesses to our family's public unraveling. Perhaps, Michael suggested diplomatically, this conversation is best continued privately. Would anyone care for more champagne? I led my stunned parents and Claire to my home office in the Victorian, a room deliberately designed to showcase the success they'd never bothered to notice. Awards displayed on walls, business magazines featuring my projects arranged on the custom walnut desk. Dad picked up a framed photo of me cutting a ribbon at our third development project. When did all this happen? It started when you told me to get realistic about my future, I said. My thesis caught a venture capitalist's attention the same week you said I was wasting my time with impractical ideas. Mom sank into a leather chair. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment. No, I corrected, the bitterness of 2 decades spilling out. You were protecting yourselves from the possibility I might succeed on my own terms. Claire examined the architectural models lining my credenza. These are incredible, Emma. Why didn't you ever tell me? I almost did many times, I admitted. But you were Dad's golden child. I was afraid you'd accidentally reveal my projects before I was ready. Ready for what? Dad demanded. Ready to prove I didn't need your approval or your money to build something meaningful. So tonight was about revenge? Mom's voice quavered. Humiliating us in front of our friends? I shook my head, suddenly bone-tired. No. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating my engagement. You're the ones who turned it into a public declaration of my inadequacy. Dad flinched, recognition finally dawning in his eyes. We never meant. You never meant for me to find out how little faith you had in me? I finished. Or you never meant to say it out loud in front of witnesses? The silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of hurt. I've spent my whole life chasing your approval, I said finally. Do you know what I realized? It was never about my capabilities. You decided who I was when I was 12 and missed that scholarship, and nothing I did afterward could change that image. That's not fair, Dad protested. We've always wanted what's best for you. What you thought was best, I corrected. Not what actually was. Claire approached, placing a hand on my arm. For what it's worth, I never saw you the way they did. I've always admired how you charted your own path. Her sincerity caught me off guard. In our complicated family dynamic, I'd sometimes cast Claire as complicit, when maybe she'd been trapped in her own role as the designated perfect daughter. Thank you, I said, meaning it. And congrats on the inheritance. The family business will thrive under your leadership. Mom stood shakily. You must think we're terrible parents. Despite everything, my heart twisted at the vulnerability in her voice. I think you're human, I replied carefully. You did what you thought was right based on who you thought I was. And who are you, Emma? Dad asked, his tone lacking its usual judgment. The question was surprisingly profound from a man who'd always been so certain about everything. I'm someone who builds things, I said after a moment. Who sees potential where others see only ruin. I restore what's been abandoned and make it beautiful again. I paused, realizing the metaphor of my life's work. I guess I've been trying to do for neglected buildings what no one ever did for me. Dad's expression shifted, something like recognition, perhaps even respect, flickering across his features. May I see it? He asked quietly. Your home. The one you built. In all our years, I couldn't remember my father ever showing interest in anything I'd created. Yes, I decided. I'd like that. I led them through a hidden garden path connecting the properties, designed specifically for easy passage between them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my life literally next door to parents who couldn't see me, creating my own legacy in the shadow of theirs. As we approached my glass and steel home, exterior lights activated automatically, illuminating architectural details that had taken months to perfect. You designed this? Mom asked, voice hushed. With Michael. He balances my tendency toward dramatic statements. For the first time in memory, my mother looked at me with something approaching awe. Inside, my home revealed itself as both a statement of success and a deeply personal sanctuary. Travel photographs lined one wall, artifacts from project sites thoughtfully displayed. Books filled custom shelves, the same classics from my father's library alongside volumes on architecture, business, and philosophy. This is. Dad trailed off, absorbing evidence of a life he knew nothing about. It's extraordinary, Claire finished, running her hand along the kitchen island's waterfall edge. I had no idea. That was rather the point, I admitted. I needed to build this without your expectations coloring every decision. Mom paused at a family photo. The four of us at the beach when I was 10, before academic pressures and disappointed sighs created the chasm between us. We've missed so much, she whispered. Yes, I agreed simply. You have. Why here? Dad asked suddenly. Of all the places you could have built, why directly beside our property? It was the question I'd asked myself countless times during construction. The answer had evolved as walls were torn down and rebuilt, as light was brought into spaces that had been dark for decades. At first it was about proving something, I admitted. Showing you I could succeed where the Hendersons failed, right under your nose. I moved to the windows overlooking the valley we both called home. But it was simpler than that, really. Despite everything, this valley is still home. And maybe. I hesitated, vulnerability difficult after years of self-protection. Maybe part of me still hoped someday you'd actually see me. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad looked away, his jaw working with emotion he'd never been comfortable expressing. The silence broke when Michael arrived with Claire's husband Ben. Everything okay? Michael asked, eyes finding mine. Yes, I said, surprised to mean it. Just showing my parents the house. What do you think? Michael asked them, his hand finding the small of my back. Dad cleared his throat. It's impressive. We've clearly underestimated Emma. The admission, however grudging, felt seismic. Not just her capabilities, Michael said. When Emma commits to something, failure isn't an option. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Perhaps we could have dinner here sometime? Get to know this version of our daughter. A small olive branch, but more than I'd expected. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself. The party ended in a blur of goodbyes. As the last guest departed, I found myself alone on the terrace, staring at my parents' home visible through the trees. "You okay?" Michael asked, wrapping his arms around me. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I spent years planning the perfect moment to show them who I'd become, and now that it's happened." "It didn't fix everything," he finished. "No. But maybe it wasn't supposed to." He kissed my temple. "Your father asked about our business model before they left. I think you genuinely impressed him." I laughed softly. "Only took 30 years. Some renovations take longer than others," he said, using our professional shorthand for particularly challenging projects. Next morning, an unexpected text from Claire. "Breakfast at the estate?" "Just us. Parents at church." An hour later, I sat in our childhood kitchen, watching Claire make coffee with the efficiency that characterized everything she did. "They were up all night," she said, sliding a mug toward me. "Dad paced his study until dawn. Discussing how I've betrayed family traditions? Actually, discussing how they failed you." Claire's eyes met mine. I've never seen Dad so rattled. I stirred my coffee, unsure how to process this. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "About your success? Did you think I'd be jealous? Weren't you always?" I countered. The golden child watching the disappointment finally do something right? Claire's face fell. "Is that how you saw me?" "God, Emma, I've spent my life trying to measure up to you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" "You were perfect, straight as tennis champion, prom queen. Everything they wanted. Everything they settled for," Claire corrected. "You were the brilliant one. I was just reliable." Say, do you know how many times I heard, "If only you had Emma's mind"? The revelation stunned me. While I'd measured myself against Claire's perceived perfection, she'd been doing the same with my potential. They pitted us against each other, I realized. Not intentionally, Claire sighed. But effectively. We sat in silence, re-examining decades of misunderstanding. "The house," Claire said finally. "I don't want it if it comes between us." I had no idea about Dad's announcement. "Keep it," I said, meaning it. "You'll do amazing things with the family business." "And you?" she asked. "Where do you belong?" "Next door apparently," I smiled. "Building something of my own." That afternoon, an unexpected delivery arrived. A vintage set of architectural drafting tools in a leather case. The card read simply, "Your grandfather's. He was also a builder. Perhaps you inherited more than we realized." "Dad." I traced the brass instruments, imagining my grandfather using them decades ago, creating structures I'd never seen but whose legacy might have shaped my own passions. As sunset painted the valley in gold, I stood at the invisible boundary between properties, the line separating my parents' world from the one Michael and I were creating. The division seemed less like a wall now, more like a doorway. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The relationship with my parents would require careful renovation. Like restoring century-old woodwork, painstaking and frustrating but potentially beautiful. For tonight, though, it was enough knowing that finally, after all these years, they'd seen me, not as the daughter they'd wanted, but as the woman I'd become. Sometimes the most important structures we build aren't made of glass and steel at all.